The Sacramento County Sheriff's Department is no longer responding to mental health calls. The sheriff said that being mentally ill is not a crime, and they've changed their policy due to officers' liability in the event that they respond to a scene and use force on a mentally ill person. They don't have blanket immunity anymore. So this is a press conference that they gave on February 4th, 2025. This is the Sacramento, California County Sheriff's Department's new policy on mental illness. Watch this until the end. It is kind of long, but just watch it because people are asking questions to see whether or not they think this is right or wrong. Put it in the comments what you think. Should they stop responding to mental health calls?
All right, welcome everyone. Introducing behind me, Under Sheriff Mike Ziegler, Chief Deputy Sal Robles, and I'll turn it over, of course, to Sheriff Jim Cooper.
Good morning. Good to see you all here. I think as residents of California, we see mental illness on a daily basis. Our homeless, it's been a big issue out front for a long time. A lot of discussions about it. I think what we also don't recognize is what goes on in someone's houses. Families day in and day out fight mental illness, fight their loved ones. It's always been a big issue. And for far too long, law enforcement's been armed to come and deal with that issue. And the dynamics have really changed. And let me say this first and foremost. It is not a crime to be mentally ill. A lot of folks suffer from that. Some folks get the help they need, some folks don't. So traditionally, we responded to all the mental health calls in Sacramento County all the time. These type of calls include standbys for the fire department, and they're responding to medical and mental health calls. There was a recent court ruling by the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals that overturned a lower court decision that officers, they were dealing with someone mentally ill and used body weight to restrain them. An individual died. And they ruled against the officers. And what they said is the use of force by officers was deemed unreasonable given the call was non-criminal. Mental health law enforcement response. The court called into question whether any force at all would have been appropriate due to there not having been a criminal element. So law enforcement officers are not trained mental health professionals. We're not psychiatrists, we're not psychologists. We don't deal with it. We've had minimal training at de-escalation. So the courts say we can no longer have a blanket approach to non-criminal mental health calls where someone can be physically harmed. So with that, we reevaluated our policy and it created a new legal standard. Obviously, the community response to the use of any force on solely mental health calls, and then also qualified immunity. So you think about this, if you're on a call, and officers can be held personally liable. Personally liable. The fire department can't, mental health professionals can't. And that's a big issue. There have been bad outcomes in California and throughout our nation where folks have reached out and called law enforcement and someone dies as a result of that. I don't want that happening. Sometimes we introduce a badge and a gun in a situation, it escalates the issue. And we can't have that happen here. And I know a lot of folks that I've talked to, other chiefs, other sheriffs, and folks in the fire service feel the same way. We're always called to do these issues. I was reading a call the other day where some person's called us probably 12 to 15 times over their daughter being mentally ill. Never committing a crime, just mentally ill. And I keep going back, that is not a crime. We can't keep doing what we're doing and coming to these calls. It has to change. And as sheriff, I have the power to make the decision. And we're gonna change how we do business. So last year we took in over 65,000 911 calls, which were transferred by fire. We received over 2,100 calls from fire requesting assistance, not counting calls we were already responding to. Call types we responded to with a mental health component varied all over the spectrum, ranging from welfare checks and trespassing calls all the way up to felony assaults. We've got some audio for you here, just as an example for you to listen to and hear what we hear. Because it's really tough to put it in perspective, but I think when you hear some of these calls that people are calling 911, the calls we're dealing with. So we're gonna cue those up right now. with technology, it never works when you want it.
Join a club.
Yeah, so please bear with us. So I'll talk about one call while we're waiting for the audio to queue up. An event this year, a caregiver called. The person was trying self-harm. They tried to self-strangulate themselves last night. They were nonviolent. That person did nothing criminally wrong. So I've got to ask myself and ask the public, why are we responding to that call if there's nothing criminal? We're law enforcement. We don't want a bad outcome. Another one, this is a transfer from fire. Both were transfers from the fire department. The person had a wound on their foot. They were in their bedroom refusing to come out. There were no weapons there. Why am I responding to that call? Why am I putting my deputies in harm's way? They don't want to have to take someone's life. No one wants that to ever happen. It's very traumatic on our officers. We have a lot invested in these officers, and the community does too. We want to make sure they're long tenured employees. But I'll be honest, it screws them up when it happens. And I can't let that continue to happen. Another event this year, a transfer from fire. 94-year-old patient intentionally struck a pin in his head, like a ballpoint pen. He said it would be cooperative with fire. They want us to come as a precaution. There is nothing criminally wrong there. So I can go on and on and on and talk about these calls, but at some point, someone has to be the adult in the room. Is it ready?
We'll play it after.
Pardon?
We'll play it after.
We'll play it afterwards, okay. Someone has to be the adult in the room and say, enough is enough. We need more funding for mental health. It's gotta change. So what happened, we had immediate policy changes. So in the comm center, when a caller calls in, that call taker will ask more questions and really delve into it to see if there's a criminal element. The communications supervisor will have the authority to not dispatch the call. And if it is dispatched, the watch commander, a sheriff's manager, lieutenant, will be vetted, the call will be vetted to ensure there are elements of a crime or someone other than the mental health subject is in danger. Criminal mental health calls will be treated as a major event. We will have the right not to respond from the fire departments for standby calls in which a criminal element is absent. So we also have pending policy changes. And prior to this, we actually met with folks from fire, EMS, and also county health, and folks from the county executive's office, and told them we've done this preliminary changes at first and where we're heading to. So obviously, still in development, we want the best practices for the critical incident team, which pairs a CIT individual with one of our deputies. Finalizing a memorandum of understanding with the county wellness response team, the 988 line, and moving 988 transfer calls instead of referrals. So right now, 988 is a system we have in the county that's really not well known, and we're going to make it more well known. So if you call 988, before we say, hey, it's a mental health issue, no crime being involved, and we would have them call 988 themselves. Now we transfer. So it's a seamless connection. It's easier. There's no chance of an issue happening. So that's a much better procedure. And then also comprehensive data, tracking to monitor these policy changes. So our deputies still respond, and that's the thing that folks don't realize. So up there on the board, we have deputies will still respond when a crime's being committed, when a crime has been committed, or there's a request for service in which the individual's life or risk of bodily injury is imminent, other than the individual who's experiencing a mental health crisis. So we talk about a public duty doctrine. Once we show up in these calls, we own these calls. You show up and you engage. No matter what happens, you own it. And like I said, a lot of folks are at their wits' end dealing with someone, a family member that's mentally ill. We don't want to be the individual that comes there and escalates it. And that's a real issue. There's a lot of things to do, and I think we're headed on the right track. But I think you'll see more public safety folks come out and talk about this. So it's really been a hidden issue. But law enforcement can't be the answer to this. It is not the correct answer to come out. And like I said, you go to the newspapers and Google it, there have been far too many bad outcomes, and it can't continue. It has to stop now. So I know some folks like us coming out. I've heard some comments, hey, I've called you guys out dozens of times and it's worked out good. All it takes is one time for it to go south. then we're being sued, the county's being sued, and the deputies are personally being sued. And that's the big issue. At the end of the day, we want everybody to go home safe. So a lot of things have happened with that. So we talk about 988. So 988 works. The big issue is a criminal element. So on the 988 is a mental health crisis hotline operating 24/7, 365 days a year for those suffering mental and drug abuse crises. 988 provides immediate help from extensively trained mental health counselors who provide risk assessments and many other mental health resources, including crisis counseling. It provides help through chat, text, by phone, and in some cases, mobile response. 988 also provides a voluntary mobile response for any mental health crisis. 988 works. I think we did a survey for the first week this was implemented. We got about 320 calls. We didn't respond to 18 calls. So the world's not falling apart. We'll still respond to those calls when it has those 3 things listed up there. But like I said, if you think about it, being mentally ill is not a crime. And we can't be the answer. And for some politicians, they've got to work harder with this and really change the narrative. We've got a great relationship with the Board of Supervisors working on this going forward. I'm excited about it. I'm excited at 988. And that's important for the media to push that out for folks to call it. And then when you're dealing with someone mentally ill, you think about this. You have someone mentally ill and you put drugs in there, 2 + 2 = 10. And that's a big difference. So like I said, most of these 988 calls, it resolves over the phone. So think about that. We also had a call where someone was on a hotline, a crisis hotline, threatening suicide in their house with a gun to their head. No one else was there. We didn't go. That person is still alive. If we had gone, this person has a gun. Are they going to shoot my deputies? Will my deputies shoot them? That's the big issue. It's not an easy issue, it's a very tough issue. But we're dealing with human beings, and we want to afford them that dignity. But I never want to put my folks in place where they have to take someone's life if we don't have to. And it comes down to, we're the badge, we carry the gun. We deal with crime, not mental health crises. So I'm going to turn it over to Undersheriff Ziegler, who does the please.
Yeah, before I put a cap on how the sheriff covered everything, right? That with our new policy that we're enacting now, a policy that's coming. Does anybody have any questions at this point? Good.
So Sacramento, thank you. We've spoken to Sacramento Metro Fire, and they say that this new policy puts all firefighters in the county at risk. So my question to you is, what were those conversations like with them? You said they went well. What we're hearing is that they're concerned, and they do not agree with this policy.
Well, I got to tell you, I'm a 94-year-old patient. There's 4 firefighters on an engine. I'm not really sure what a 94-year-old person will do to 4 firefighters. That's a fire call. Someone's got a wound on their foot, in the bedroom, not coming out, no weapons. They want us to come there. What do they expect us to do? I'll be honest, there's no crime. We're not the bodyguards for everybody. If there's no crime being committed, why is law enforcement there? I've never heard anyone give a good reasoning for that. And we stand by a lot for fire, and we love our brothers and sisters in the fire service. But some of these calls we should not be going to. And it's a cushion. You know, hey, we got them there, they're coming there. Or come stand by, we've had problems before, but if something's going on, we'll be there. And then if someone's assaulted, you've also got to prosecute them, which doesn't happen. They don't want to press charges. So there are a lot of moving parts to this. But at the end of the day, they aren't losing qualified immunity. They aren't being sued personally for everything they own. The court ruling is very clear. Just because someone has a mental health episode, you cannot use any force. There's another court ruling where if someone's deemed a danger to themselves or others, a 5150, we cannot transport unless they agree to be transported. Now, if someone's suffering a mental health crisis, how many folks say, yeah, take me in? Very few. So what has happened in essence, the court has tied our hands. This isn't made just in a vacuum. These are policies that impact us and impact my officers that are trying to do their job and to the best of their ability. It impacts the county for liability. It impacts the sheriff's office for liability.
Yeah, another piece on that, we hear fire loud and clear, right? And there's current program in the county, critical intervention team, where clinicians ride along with our deputies. It's a very small program. It has a lot of room to grow. And part of the process that we thought through this, listening to fire and their concerns. Remember, non-criminal, crime hasn't been committed, right? We have no business being there. Maybe there's time to take a look at, maybe the CIT team doesn't run with law enforcement, ride along with law enforcement. Maybe they ride along with fire, right? Because they won't go into violent situations either, but they're trying to de-escalation. So we're looking at a lot of different policies. Are we doing things the right way? Part of the things that we looked at what we can do better, and the sheriff alluded to it, he actually said it, was don't break contact if somebody is calling with a mental health crisis, there's no crime involved, but instead of referring them to 988, we transfer to 988. 988 is a very good program. Their statistics alone, 80% of their calls are handled over the phone. And these could be calls where we show up. There is no secret in law enforcement, and we know it, that if we show up with a badge and a gun, with the ability to take someone's civil rights away and take them to jail, just by us being there escalates the situation, right? And if you're having a mental health crisis, how much more does that add to it? And it's very, the policy the sheriff's putting into place, the way we view it, is actually very compassionate, because we don't want to cause harm to people who aren't thinking right, who haven't committed a crime.
Any other questions?
Can I ask another one then?
Absolutely.
Okay, cool. Okay, so feedback that we've heard from our viewers is a little bit of confusion, so maybe you could clear that up. There's a lot of talk of the court ruling, protection for officers, the county being sued, and can you kind of connect, or rather even explain of, it sounds like a lot of talk about officers' protection and escalating the situation. One of the questions we've seen is, why not be able to train in some of these de-escalation tactics for officers so that it isn't 0 to 100 when an officer shows up with a gun? Can you kind of talk to that a little bit? Because there is some confusion, because it does seem like, and you said it, this is just avoiding a lawsuit. And I think there's, we've heard confusion from the public on what that actually means. Why should they care of avoiding a lawsuit, basically? So
we're training de-escalation. We do that, but you're dealing with someone mentally ill. That's a situation when you insert yourself in that. And like I said, no one wants to take somebody's life, and it's happened across the place. You don't control that, and obviously someone being mentally ill doesn't control their actions. So you don't dictate how it happens or how it approaches. You're only responding to that, and that's really been the big issue when we deal with that. And I know folks are having a hard time understanding it, but it is a court ruling. Like I said, it doesn't impact anybody else except for law enforcement, where I don't know what job anyone will do if you stand a chance of losing your house and everything you've earned in your life by an action you're doing at work. You're responding to a call. So we don't have a lot of control over what happens within the escalation, but there are incidents where someone's coming at you. So it's really moment by moment. Each incident is different. Is somebody on drugs? It depends. A lot of them turn out okay, but quite often some don't. And we've seen them here in Sacramento and throughout California, the nation. And that's really the big issue, how to deal with that. And I think we're professionals, we see it, we recognize it. It's not an easy decision, but for far too long, when someone calls us, it's not a crime. Why have we been doing this all along? Being mentally ill is not a crime, but yet we're being here, being forced to be there and be that person. And I'm at the point, as sheriff elected, enough's enough. I get to make the decision. I don't have a city council tell me what I will or will not do, dictating me. The voters voted me in, and I'll be honest, to do this job. And if I'm doing a bad job, they can vote me out. But I want to protect, first and foremost, before my officers, I want to protect the community and make sure we never take someone's life, hopefully ever again. Secondly, I want to protect my officers. I have a fiduciary responsibility to the county, to the residents that pay the taxes. So it's really a number of things when I look at it holistically. And that's what it comes down to. But I never heard someone give me a good reason. I'd love to hear one, why we should be responding to these calls. And that's really the crux of the issue.
Sheriff, I wanted to get a sense of how many calls would, in a given month or a given year, would be eliminated with this policy. I'm trying to get a sense of how big of a piece of the number of calls you get this would cover.
We currently only have a very small data sample because the policy, especially these calls being vetted by the comm center, the sergeant, and the lieutenant, is new, right? So in the first 6 days, the sheriff already spoke to it. We had 320 calls that had a mental health component to it, and in 6 days, we didn't go to 18 of those calls. Part of the new policy that's being implemented right now, it wasn't the first part of the policy, but it's the second part of the policy, is data collection. So I think it would be better to answer that question as we grab the data. And one of the questions too came, well, what's a definition of a criminal activity, right? What is that? And that's what we are. And we're professionals that know when a crime's been committed or is being committed. And like one of the examples that we heard from some of the advocates. And by the way, when we had the meeting with fire and the county exec's office and mental health, we got a lot of good feedback in that meeting, right? I mean, fire's response was, yeah, we feel like we have to go to everything too. Maybe we shouldn't have to go to everything, right? If it's not within our jurisdiction or purview. But like somebody brought up an example of, what if you have somebody that's suffering a mental health crisis and they're running in and out of traffic? That's a crime because it's impeding with traffic. We go to those. So when we're talking about this, it's really important to understand that our definition of criminal activity is very, very broad. And I don't think it's going to be huge, but we'll have more data to not support that position, but to share with the public as we go along and we collect that.
Do you recall the Michael McIntyre case?
I wasn't here, so I don't really.
You were in the legislature too.
Yeah.
It was a case where a gentleman was having a mental health issue. Officers arrived, it escalated, and resulted in the death of the individual. So,
Right.
If you don't remember the case.
No, it was ironic in the legislature, bring that up. The advocates didn't want us going to these calls. I heard that resoundingly. You shouldn't be going to these calls. And now we're saying we're not going to go to these calls, and not everybody, but a lot of folks are angry about that. So we're really put in a tough situation. And that's the issue. And it's just like I said, this is a common sense thing. This is not college stuff, it's just common sense. If you haven't committed a crime, why am I there? We don't want bad outcomes. We want everybody at the end of the day to go home safe. And that's where this is headed. And hopefully, I'll tell you what, there'll be discussions about it. Trust me, when you show it on your TV shows, in the paper, on radio, they'll be talking about what they're gonna do. But a lot of folks are afraid to ruffle feathers. And that's the big issue. They've got a master, and they cannot do things. And that's the key issue. Yeah.
Can you more explicitly state who you believe should be responding to these calls? And how do you wrestle with the fact that other individuals will then be in the same precarious situation that your deputies would have been in had they been the ones to respond?
So number one, mental health professionals, someone that's trained to do this, a trained clinician. We're not trained clinicians. We've had minimal amount of training, and they will still respond. Most of these calls resolve. We go to some calls, a lot of calls. Obviously right now, every call, most part. And we had a few incidents, not a ton. So to be honest, the universe is not that big. We hear about it here in Sacramento. How many times is someone, a result of a mental health call where someone's life's been taken? Not a ton of cases. Okay, I've lived here my entire life. Not a ton of cases, but still it's too many cases with that. So it's like, you could what if all day. People could, people do, but at the end of the day, I think when someone's there not in uniform, the badge and gun, it sets a different tone for that person. Like I said, they're trained in this. The problem is it costs a lot of money. They got to pay more for those clinicians, so it is a budget issue. And whether you're, even to the homeless community, but putting that money in the right place. It also involves substance abuse too. But we spent $24 billion on building housing, And to me, some of that money could go elsewhere to really deal with this issue on mental illness.
I don't have the numbers in front of me, of course, but I have to assume that there are more Sacramento County Sheriff's deputies employed in the county than there are mental health clinicians. Does this change in policy, is it perhaps premature to allow the county time to stock their pool of people who could respond instead?
Well, the pool's 11 right now. It needs to be bigger, but obviously a lot of state funding comes into that and funding with our local cities. So the county's concerned about it. It's a big issue with them. But I think at the end of the day, if this stops us from taking someone's life, even one life, it's worth it.
Yeah. Me again. Can you think of any recent cases where the county or an officer has been sued because of a response to a call?
We get sued on a routine basis, responding to calls.
Mental health
By
calls?
family members, yes.
Can you think of any recent case that you can talk about of
Nothing
what
I
that
can
was?
Nothing I can talk about now.
But recently, in the last 6 months, last year, the county or an officer has been sued because of their response to a mental health call.
I think there's cases countywide on this topic.
Have you discussed this? I'm sure, you said fire, but have you talked to Sacramento police about how you're handling this?
Yes, they're aware of it.
And are you going to be working together on this? Can you talk about what that conversation was like?
They were there for the briefing.
Okay, so it's all in the same.
Yeah, they were there for the briefing. So it's just, like I said, it's different politics in the city and county. More?
I'm sorry, do I need the microphone?
That way,
Just
the audience can hear you.
I don't even know if it works, but doesn't this show that the limitations of government's ability to deal with the number of people who are either suffering mental health or drug addiction, that we just can never seem to have enough money to deal with it?
That's a great question. I agree with you. So I spent 15 years as a mayor and council member, 8 years as an assemblyman. I've been in law enforcement 32 years. And you really got to address down deep the mental health issue and the addiction issue. Those are two important things. And it costs a lot of money. And I don't think it's been addressed sufficiently to deal with these issues. They want to do everything else, but you have to deal with that. The majority of inmates in the downtown jail have some type of mental illness. They're taking medication right now. So we see it day in and day out. A lot of our folks that are unhoused, we see it. It is a problem. And that should be the most important task that we deal with is that. And it goes unanswered, quite often.
So you're kind of calling people's bluff in a way by doing this?
Yeah. Yeah, and this is gonna create discussion. I'll take the hit for it. I'm okay with that. But it's gonna start discussion amongst a lot of folks here, and much needed discussion.
I have a question.
Sure.
With the number you mentioned, 998, is this number in effect that people can call now, or is this something that you guys are going to be working?
It's been up for a long time, so we have to do a better job, and we'll do that on our sheriff's website. I know the county's doing it too, to make people aware to call 988 for mental illness issues or substance abuse issues. They do both, and it's 24/7. So we've got to do a better job, and we will. Any other questions? Thank you very much for coming out. Appreciate you. God bless you.